Welcome to Contemporary Black Voices. And my name is Dr. Sharon Michael Chadwell. And sitting with me today is Caleb Alexander and our special guest, Mario Solace. I don't know if you had an opportunity of seeing Amanda Seal on YouTube in a series called Jubilee Surrounded, but her particular show was called One Black Radical versus 20 Black Conservatives. And it was interesting in that we got to hear the voices of these Black conservatives. We got to hear Amanda's voice, but I was really honing in on the voices of the conservatives who stepped up to the table to discuss issues related to reparations, the black, hold on, black on black crime, systemic racism, black conservatism and class, and black immigrants versus black Americans. So each one of those topics was discussed. Someone said, well, she really didn't debate. And I have to agree, but she was talking about points that were non-negotiable for her in terms of these were issues that needed to be discussed. So did you guys see the show?
I saw about 3 minutes of it and I got sick and cut it off.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about in these three segments that we have. I'm going to isolate some of the themes, but reparations for descendants of slavery. We're hearing this delineation between African American down to Black American, down to foundational Black American, but she phrased this in a way that I appreciated it even more when she says descendants of chattel slaves in the United States. To me, which is a little bit more hitting as to if and when these reparations are done, it goes to descendants of chattel slaves versus descendants of foundational slaves, where it kind of muddies the water even more so as to, so what's a foundational Black American? Because a lot of white people are saying, well, if we're doing foundational Black Americans, I have Black in my blood. We got Islanders saying, I'm a foundational Black American. But she said descendants of chattel slaves in the United States. So when we talk about reparations, there's always some type of discussion as to what this is supposed to look like. So I have a question. How do we reconcile differing views on reparation within the Black community, especially across class, region, and immigrant status?
Sharon, for me, every time the word reparation comes up, people tend to think of it in terms of dollar amounts. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's what you need to do. I frankly wouldn't want to see dollar amounts. I think you need to see things like free education, you need to see things like maybe a head start on the generational wealth that was taken away. So maybe homes at very well reduced prices that are considered middle-class homes, so that you give back that generational wealth. And this isn't somebody getting a check, but I noticed that from some of those kinds of discussions that people always bring up the money. And when you bring up the money, you bring up the argument, well, what are the drug addicts going to do with the money? They're just going to become bigger drug addicts. Well, we ought not be talking about just money. We need to be talking about free medical care. Mm-hmm. We ought to be talking about free education. We ought to be talking about help on mortgage payments, those kinds of things, which increase generational wealth as opposed to giving somebody a one-shot deal on an income tax check. But they don't seem to want to gravitate to that. And even some of the best people talking about reparations, they missed that boat. And then they get into all this arguments about how much should it be, $1 million for everybody. Don't do that. What ought to be talked about is talking about the things that were denied them. Education was denied, or if it wasn't, it was a rotten education. Those kinds of things, job discrimination, those kinds of things, social programs that were denied to them, um, as well as even some financial programs as well. So I don't think people are all on the same wavelength or even have the same perceptions that many other people do. And when you say reparations, you aren't just talking about money.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, especially of the participants, the black conservative participants who were not, I'm going to say, native Black Americans. They were coming in from other locales across the world, and how one man was basically saying that reparations isn't owed. And of course, Amanda got frustrated trying to explain exactly what you were saying, all the systemic racism that has occurred in the country, preventing Blacks from moving forward, preventing this continual ability to generate generational wealth.
Right.
So, Kayla.
No, I mean, I saw that part. And I think she probably could have done better explaining to him, because one of his points were, well, what happens to the white immigrant who came in later, whose family never owned slaves, or the white people who never owned slaves? That was one of the arguments, right? But I think she missed the opportunity to explain to him how the white society in general, wholesale, benefited from free Black labor, right? You didn't have to own a slave to benefit from slavery. The roads that were cleared, the entire capital that was built. So it set the foundations for economic wealth in this country. So I think that she could have done a little bit better explaining how people who didn't own slavery benefited.
That's a good point, because what you're telling me is that she missed over the fact that most whites who fought for the slave owners in the Civil War didn't own slaves, but the incentive was to stop freedom, because if freedom ever came, slavery ended. In their mind, then Blacks would become the equal of whites. So they benefited from being white, even though they couldn't own slaves because they were poor whites.
Poor whites, yeah.
So they benefited from that racism, and I guess she didn't hit that.
She didn't hit that point. So, which she could have. The other thing about the entire conversation, just a little offshoot, the conversation was geared, I know she said she wanted to gear the conversation toward like more average everyday people instead of debating people who were like her intellectual equal, right? And so I felt like it would have been a better conversation, or a conversation would have been better served if she could have debated the theorists behind a lot of the nonsense. If she pulls the legs from the people that these folks are listening to, you know what I mean, and debunk the myths that these people are putting out, it probably would have been a much better, you know what I mean, outcome for everybody. You have to take away the people who are providing a pseudo-intellectual basis for the nonsense, So I think it would have been a lot better. But back to, you know how I feel about this idea of foundational Black Americans and all this kind of stuff, right? And so most of the time when that conversation comes up, people are dismissing people from other areas, particularly in the Caribbean, right? Because they are lining up for what I call trauma trinkets, thinking that if reparations comes, you know what I mean, you people don't deserve it, we deserve it because we're foundational Black Americans, right? So we're going to sell out our own folks in order to be first in line for these trauma trinkets if the white folks ever give them to us, right? So I have an issue with that. But I also have an issue because people don't understand how widespread slavery was not a part of the global economy. Slavery was the global economy. And so without those people in the Caribbean suffered because of what America was. The sugar that was grown in the Caribbean was sent to the United States. The people who financed slavery in the Caribbean were not Caribbean banks. They were American banks. The people who insured the slavery in the Caribbean were not Caribbean insurance companies. They were American and British. So the trauma that occurred in the Caribbean, America is directly responsible for that as well. So to say America's off the hook or shouldn't owe reparations to the folks in the Caribbean as well, they missed the complete boat on that as well.
And that's a great point, because back during the 1830s or so, the guy from the Alamo fame, Jim Bowie, he often purchased slaves And there's a record that shows, I forget the number, but quite a few slaves from Grenada landed at Galveston Island, and Jim Bowie had a piece of that
Wow.
financial transaction. Even though they were from Grenada, they they became American slaves.
Yeah,
Chattel
absolutely.
slaves. So
Yeah,
that's a great point.
absolutely. America was the draw. Without America, a lot of those folks, I mean, America was the big incentive. We're going to go and we're going to, first stop, we're going to drop them off in Cuba. We're going to drop them off in Santo Domingo, and then we're going to head to America. And we're going to sell the bulk of our cargo in America. And we're going to resupply in America to go back to this circular journey and pick up more. So America was the huge magnet that drew slavery into the Caribbean and into the Americas. You know what I mean? So I think people miss that point when they try to divide us from him and them and saying who gets owed more or who gets owed less. It was collective trauma for all of us. So that's my quick point.
We're going to go ahead and stop this conversation for a few minutes and come back